Surprise, honey, Amanda chirped, her hands cradling her visibly pregnant belly as she stood on my front porch, beaming at my shell-shocked husband. Those two words shattered the peaceful Sunday afternoon I had planned. 15 years of marriage crumbled before my eyes as I stood in the doorway of our colonial home in Westlake Hills, watching my husband's face drain of all color. I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles white, but my expression betrayed nothing of the storm raging inside me. Not surprise. No, I was well past that emotion, but rather a cold, calculated fury that had been building for months. "Well," I said calmly, stepping aside, "you might as well come in, Amanda. It seems we have quite a lot to discuss." What neither of them knew was that I'd been waiting for this moment. Every detail of what would follow had been orchestrated with precision. By nightfall, both their lives would be in ruins, and I would finally have my justice. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The autumn breeze scattered golden leaves across our perfectly manicured lawn as Amanda waddled through our front door. Her floral maternity dress stretched across her 7-month belly, the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist catching the afternoon sunlight. My husband David remained frozen on the porch, his Sunday newspaper still tucked under his arm, his face a mixture of shock and unmistakable fear. He knew me too well to think this would end quietly. "Come inside, David," I said, my voice carrying that same professional calm I used with difficult clients at my law firm. "Your guest is waiting." Our home, the sprawling 5-bedroom house in Westlake Hills that we had customized together during our 3rd year of marriage, suddenly felt like a stage set. The gleaming hardwood floors, the carefully selected artwork, the family photos chronicling 15 years together, all of it now seemed like elaborate props in a play that was reaching its final act. Amanda settled her pregnant form onto our Italian leather sofa, looking around with undisguised curiosity and a hint of triumph. She was younger than me, 32 to my 43, with the kind of effortless beauty that comes with youth. David's architectural firm had hired her as a junior designer 18 months ago. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," Amanda said with feigned politeness, her hand resting protectively over her rounded belly. "But I thought it was time we all had an honest conversation." David finally stepped inside, closing the door behind him with the careful movements of a man trying not to provoke a dangerous animal. His Sunday ritual of coffee and newspapers on the porch, a tradition of 15 years, had been spectacularly derailed. "Catherine," he began, using my full name, always a sign he was trying to manage the situation. "I can explain." I held up my hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Can I get you something to drink, Amanda? Water? Tea? A prenatal vitamin, perhaps?" The sarcasm was subtle but unmistakable. She smiled uncertainly. "Water would be nice, thank you." I moved to our kitchen, separated from the living room by a breakfast bar that allowed me to keep both of them in view. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust particles in the air, tiny, floating witnesses to the implosion of my marriage. "How far along are you?" I asked conversationally, filling a glass with filtered water from our refrigerator. I already knew the answer, down to the week, but I wanted to hear her say it. 7 months, she replied, accepting the water with a nod of thanks. Due January 12th. I allowed myself a small smile as I took a seat in the armchair opposite the sofa, positioning myself so I could observe both their faces. 7 months. How interesting. That would mean conception was right. Around the time of the Walker Plaza project unveiling, wouldn't it? David's jaw tightened. The Walker Plaza project had been his firm's biggest achievement of the year. A 30-story downtown development that had secured their reputation as one of the premier architectural firms in the state. The night of the unveiling gala, he had given an impassioned speech about integrity in design and building legacies that stand the test of time. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Catherine, please," David said, his voice strained. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out." "And how exactly did you plan for me to find out, David?" I asked, my tone still eerily calm. "After the birth? At the child's high school graduation? Or perhaps you were waiting for me to discover it myself, like I discovered the hotel charges, the late nights at the office, the mysterious weekend conferences?" Amanda's triumphant expression faltered slightly. Clearly, she hadn't expected me to already know about their affair. Her eyes darted to David, silently questioning what else I might know. "You knew?" she asked softly. "I'm a corporate litigation attorney, Amanda. I specialize in discovering what people try to hide." I crossed my legs, smoothing my skirt. "I've known about your affair since the Henderson building redesign in February. The pregnancy, well, that particular detail I've only been aware of for about 16 weeks. David collapsed into the chair beside the fireplace, his face ashen. The confident, charismatic architect who commanded rooms full of investors and clients had vanished, replaced by a man realizing he had severely miscalculated. "If you've known for so long," Amanda said, her hand protectively covering her belly, "why haven't you said anything? Why haven't you filed for divorce?" A fair question. The oversized grandfather clock in our hallway, a wedding gift from David's parents, ticked loudly in the silence that followed. I had asked myself the same question countless times over the past months. Initially, I needed time to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with, I explained, my voice clinical and detached. And then, once I began to see the bigger picture, I realized that a simple divorce would be insufficient. "What does that mean?" David asked, speaking for the first time since his attempted explanation. I smiled thinly. "It means that I wanted to understand everything before acting. For instance, I wanted to understand why my husband's design firm suddenly won the contract for the Westside Medical Center expansion, despite being underbid by Callahan and Associates." The color drained from David's face. Behind him, on the mantel, sat a scale model of the medical center design, his most prestigious current project. "Or why 3 exceptionally qualified candidates withdrew their applications for the junior designer position shortly before Amanda was hired," I continued. "Or perhaps most interesting, why the firm's financial statements show a pattern of unusual transfers to offshore accounts over the past 18 months. Amanda's water glass froze halfway to her lips. "David, what is she talking about?" I reached for the leather portfolio I had positioned on the side table earlier that morning. Always prepared, always one step ahead. That meticulous planning had made me the youngest partner at Hammond, Warner & Price. It had also enabled me to build an airtight case against my husband over the past 6 months. "Allow me to show you," I said, opening the portfolio. "These are copies of emails between David and James Grayson, the head of the Westside Medical Center board. Note the dates and the references to special considerations in exchange for awarding the contract." I laid out the printed emails on the coffee table between us. Amanda leaned forward awkwardly, her pregnant belly making it difficult to see. "Clearly. These," I continued, placing another set of documents beside the first, "are bank statements showing transfers from the firm's project accounts to a shell company called Apex Design Solutions. And these," a third set of papers joined the others, "are records showing that Apex Design Solutions is owned by a holding company registered in David's mother's maiden name." David stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You're twisting ordinary business matters into something sinister because you're angry about the affair." "Am I?" I asked calmly. "Then perhaps you can explain why Margaret Winters withdrew her application for the junior designer position after receiving anonymous threats. Or why Thomas Chen's portfolio mysteriously disappeared from the firm's server the day before his final interview?" Both were significantly more qualified than Amanda. Amanda's eyes widened as she turned to look at David. "You said I got the job because of my innovative approach to sustainable design." "He needed someone who would be loyal to him," I explained. "Someone who would be so grateful for the opportunity." that they wouldn't question certain financial irregularities. Someone who could be easily manipulated with attention and flattery. That's not true, David insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Catherine is trying to distract from the real issue here. And what exactly is the real issue, David? I asked. Your pregnant mistress showing up on our doorstep, or the fact that you've been embezzling from your own firm while rigging contract bids? The large windows of our living room framed the perfect autumn day outside. Children riding bikes, neighbors walking dogs, all unaware of the drama unfolding within our walls. The life we had built, the reputation we had cultivated as the perfect, professional couple, was disintegrating by the second. Amanda set her water glass down with a sharp clink. I don't understand. What does any of this have to do with our baby? Perhaps nothing, I said, turning my attention to her. Though I find it interesting that your promotion to senior designer, despite having less than 2 years of experience, coincided with the establishment of a new Apex Design Solutions account. One that lists you as a signatory. Her face paled. I never signed anything like that. Signature forgery is surprisingly common in fraud cases, I noted, especially when the forger has access to employment documents with signature samples. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. David paced the room now, his confident facade completely eroded. Catherine, whatever you think you've found, you're mistaken. These are complex business arrangements that look suspicious out of context. Context like the affair you've been having with a woman 13 years your junior? Context like the baby you've conceived while still married to me? That kind of context? My voice remained steady, but the ice in my tone was unmistakable. Amanda struggled to her feet, one hand supporting her lower back. I think I should go. This is between you two. I'm afraid it's not that simple anymore, I said. You see, once I discovered the affair, I could have simply filed for divorce. Painful, but straightforward. But when I began to look more closely at why David was so insistent on hiring you specifically, I uncovered something much more problematic than infidelity. I extracted another document from my portfolio. A recent bank statement for Apex Design Solutions showing a $1.2 million deposit. This transfer occurred 3 days after the Westside Medical Center contract was awarded to David's firm. The official bid from Callahan & Associates was $800,000 lower and included more experienced healthcare facility designers. Business decisions aren't made on cost alone, David argued, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. True, I conceded. Which is why I spoke with Dr. Eleanor Richards, the head of surgery at Westside, who sat on the selection committee. She was quite surprised to learn that certain design elements she had specifically requested, elements that were in the Callahan proposal, were mysteriously absent from the committee's review materials. The grandfather clock chimed 3 times, marking the hour. 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, a time that should have been peaceful, perhaps spent gardening or reading. Instead, I was systematically dismantling the lie that my marriage had become. James Grayson is an old friend, David said, attempting to regain control of the narrative. There's nothing unusual about a board choosing to work with people they trust. James Grayson is currently under federal investigation for Medicare fraud, I countered. Something you conveniently failed to mention when you told your partners about your connection that would help secure the contract. Amanda sank back onto the sofa, her face a mask of confusion and growing horror. David, what have you done? What have you involved me in? Nothing, he insisted, moving to sit beside her. Catherine is manipulating facts to punish us both. I laughed softly. If only that were true. It would be so much simpler. I turned to Amanda. Did you know that David has been married twice? Before me? That his second wife also worked for him? That she also became pregnant? Amanda's hand flew to her mouth. You were married before Catherine? A long time ago, David said dismissively. Before I even moved to this state. It's ancient history. Not so ancient, I corrected. Jessica Turner, now Jessica Connolly, lives just 40 minutes from here. When I spoke with her last month, she was quite forthcoming about how her pregnancy coincided with financial irregularities at David's previous firm in Colorado. Irregularities that were conveniently attributed to her after their hasty divorce. Silence that followed was deafening. Outside, a neighbor's lawnmower started up, the mundane sound a stark contrast to the tension filling our living room. "You've been investigating me," David finally said, his voice hollow. "For 6 months," I confirmed. "Ever since I found Amanda's earring in your car. The pregnancy was a surprise, I'll admit, but it actually helped connect certain dots I had been struggling with." Amanda stood again, more forcefully this time. "I don't know what's going on between you two, but I won't be used as a pawn in your marriage drama. David told me you were separated, that you were only staying together for appearances while you worked out the details of your divorce." I smiled sadly at her. "And you believed him, just like you believed him when he said your design concepts were revolutionary. Just like you believed him when he promised that your relationship was special, different from his marriage to his cold, career-obsessed wife." Her eyes filled with tears. "He said you hadn't been intimate in years, that you were having an affair with a partner at your firm." "The oldest stories are often the most effective," I said gently. "David told Jessica almost the exact same thing 14 years ago. I imagine he told his first wife something similar as well." David stood abruptly, kicking the coffee table and sending the documents flying. "Enough. This is all circumstantial. Nonsense. You have no proof of anything except that I've been unfaithful, which I freely admit. The rest is just your vindictive imagination." I reached for my phone, tapped the screen a few times, and then turned it toward them both. A video began to play. David and James Grayson in David's office, discussing exactly how the bid selection would be manipulated, how the payments would be structured, and how Amanda's role would provide cover for certain creative accounting practices. "You recorded me?" David's voice was barely a whisper. "No," I corrected. "Your associate Marcus Taylor did. It seems he became concerned about certain ethical breaches and decided to protect himself. He was quite helpful once I explained that I was building a case against you, not him." Amanda's hands trembled as she reached for her purse. "I need to leave. Now." "Before you go," I said, "you should know that copies of everything I've gathered, including statements from previous employees who were pressured to falsify documents, have been provided to the State Licensing Board, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and the prosecutors handling the Westside Medical Center investigation." David lunged toward me, his face contorted with rage. "You self-righteous bitch! You've destroyed everything!" I didn't flinch. "No, David. You did that yourself. One lie, one manipulation, one fraud at a time. I simply documented it." The sound of a car pulling into our driveway drew all our attention. Through the large bay window, we could see a black sedan with government plates. 2 men in suits emerged, walking purposefully toward our front door. "Right. On schedule," I noted, checking my watch. "I believe that would be Agents Morris and Thompson from the FBI. They were particularly interested in the connection between the Westside Medical Center contract and James Grayson's other business activities." The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime absurdly incongruous with the moment. "You planned this," David said, realization dawning. "You knew Amanda would come here today." I stood, smoothing my skirt once more. "Not exactly. I knew she would come. Eventually, your pattern is remarkably consistent. The pregnant mistress always reaches a point where she wants to stake her claim, force a resolution. I simply prepared for the inevitable." "But how did you know it would be today?" Amanda asked, her voice barely audible. I smiled sadly. "Because David told his mother he was finally going to ask me for a divorce this weekend. He calls her every Sunday morning while I'm at yoga class. His mother never liked me. She was much fonder of Jessica until that relationship imploded as well. When he called this morning, I was sitting right next to her in her nursing home, recording everything while she thought I was the administrator. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. "You should answer that," Amanda said to David, her voice hardening. "And then you should explain to me exactly what kind of trouble you've gotten me into." As I walked to the door, I felt a strange lightness. 6 months of careful planning, of late nights building my case, of maintaining the facade of an oblivious wife. It had all led to this moment. By tomorrow, David's career would be in ruins, his freedom in jeopardy, his carefully constructed image of success exposed as a fraud. I opened the door to the FBI agents, my professional smile firmly in place. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming. I believe you'll find everything is exactly as I described in my statement." As they entered our home, the home that had been the showcase of our seemingly perfect life, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked calm, composed, in control. Not at all like a woman whose marriage had just imploded in the most public and humiliating way possible. But then, I had stopped being that woman 6 months ago, the day I found Amanda's earring and decided that a simple divorce would never be enough. The FBI agents made themselves comfortable in our living room, their presence transforming our Sunday afternoon domestic drama into something far more official. Agent Morris, the older of the two with salt and pepper hair and a meticulously pressed suit, reviewed the documents I had spread across the coffee table while Agent Thompson, younger with watchful eyes, positioned himself near the doorway, a subtle but effective blocking of any potential exit. "Mrs. Blackwell," Agent Morris addressed me, "these appear to match the copies you provided last week. Is there anything new you'd like to add to your statement?" "Just the unexpected arrival of Ms. Winters," I replied, gesturing toward Amanda, who stood frozen by the fireplace, one hand protectively cradling her pregnant belly. Though I believe her presence here today may actually corroborate certain timeline elements I mentioned in my written statement. David remained unnaturally still, his lawyer's instincts finally kicking in. "I'm not saying anything without my attorney present," he announced, his voice attempting authority, but landing somewhere closer to desperation. "That's certainly your right, Mr. Blackwell," Agent Morris acknowledged. "Though at this point we're simply gathering information." He turned to Amanda. "And you are?" "Amanda Winters," she replied, her voice barely audible. I work for David at Blackwell and Associates architectural firm." "And you're also in a personal relationship with Mr. Blackwell," Agent Thompson noted, not a question but a statement of fact. Amanda nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't know about any of this, the financial stuff, I mean. I just thought—" She trailed off, the full impact of the situation finally sinking in. I moved to the antique secretary desk in the corner of our living room, a wedding gift from my parents, and retrieved another folder. "Agents, you might also be interested in these," I said, handing over a set of documents. "They detail the pattern of hiring and promotion decisions at Blackwell and Associates over the past 18 months, including the irregular advancement of Ms. Winters here, despite her limited experience." David's face contorted with fury. "You've been documenting everything? For how long?" "Since the Henderson project," I replied calmly. "That was when the financial irregularities first caught my attention. The affair I discovered later, though in retrospect I should have seen that coming as well." Agent Morris raised an eyebrow. "The Henderson project?" "A 12-story office complex downtown," I explained. "The project came in significantly over budget, but the cost overruns were mysteriously approved without the usual oversight. When I asked David about it, purely out of interest in his work at that point, his explanation was unconvincing." "That's when you began looking more closely at the firm's finances?" Agent Thompson asked. "I'm a corporate litigator who specializes in financial malfeasance," I said with a slight shrug. Professional curiosity became personal concern. Amanda sank into the window seat, her face ashen. I don't understand. David told me the firm was doing better than ever. The firm has been winning prestigious contracts, I acknowledged. But winning contracts through improper influence and then siphoning funds through shell companies isn't success. It's criminal activity. David lunged toward the hallway, but Agent Thompson smoothly intercepted him. Sir, I'd advise against any sudden movements. This is my house, David shouted, his composed facade finally cracking completely. You have no right to keep me here. Actually, Agent Morris interjected, we have a warrant for your financial records and electronic devices. He extracted an official document from his breast pocket. And given the evidence already in our possession, attempting to leave could be interpreted as flight risk. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock and Amanda's quiet sobs. Through the bay window, I could see our neighbors gathering on their front lawns, curious about the official vehicles now parked in our driveway. By dinner time, the entire neighborhood would be buzzing with speculation. I need to use the bathroom, Amanda said suddenly, her hand pressed against her lower back. Of course, I replied. It's down the hall, first door on the left. As she waddled away, David collapsed onto the sofa, his head in his hands. Catherine, he said, his voice now pleading, whatever you think I've done, bringing the FBI into this is extreme. We could have worked this out privately. I regarded him coolly. Like you worked things out with Jessica after she discovered your financial manipulations at your Denver firm? By divorcing her while she was 7 months pregnant and ensuring she was implicated in your schemes? Agent Morris looked up sharply. There are prior allegations? Not formal ones, I clarified. Jessica was too frightened of losing custody of her child to pursue them. But once I discovered the pattern here, I tracked her down. She was quite forthcoming about David's methods. I moved to the bookshelf and removed a false panel behind a row of architectural design books, revealing a hidden safe. You might want to include the contents of this in your warrant execution, I told the agents. The combination is 052214. David's eyes widened in recognition, the date of his largest project completion, the password he used for numerous accounts. Agent Thompson opened the safe, extracting several USB drives, a stack of banking documents, and a small recorder. You've been thorough, Mrs. Blackwell. 15 years of marriage, I said simply. I know where he hides things. The bathroom door opened and Amanda emerged, her face freshly washed but her eyes still red. I think I should go, she announced, gathering her purse. This is clearly a legal matter between you two. Actually, Ms. Winters, Agent Morris interjected, we'll need a statement from you as well, particularly regarding your position at the firm and any documents you may have signed. The blood drained from her face. Am I in trouble? I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That would depend on your level of knowledge and involvement, I explained. Unwitting participation is different from active conspiracy. David surged to his feet again. Don't say anything, Amanda. They're trying to pit us against each other. Catherine has orchestrated this whole thing out of jealousy. Jealousy? I repeated, allowing myself a small, cold laugh. David, I stopped feeling anything for you the moment I realized what you really are. This isn't about your affair. It's about justice for everyone you've manipulated, defrauded, and betrayed, including Amanda. I crossed to the side table and picked up a framed photograph. David and I on our 10th anniversary trip to Santorini, both of us smiling against the backdrop of white buildings and blue sea. For years, I believed in our partnership. I defended you to colleagues who thought you were too smooth, too perfect. I supported your ambitions, celebrated your successes, excused your late nights and weekend conferences. I set the photograph, face down. But you weren't just betraying me. You were betraying everything I value professionally and personally: integrity, honesty, ethical conduct. The doorbell rang again. Through the window, I could see Richard Hayes, David's attorney and longtime friend, standing on the porch looking grave. More cars had joined the FBI vehicles, local police, likely responding to the federal activity. In our upscale neighborhood, "That would be your lawyer," I noted. Agent Thompson moved to open the door, speaking briefly with Richard before allowing him inside. Richard's expression shifted from professional concern to shock as he took in the scene. FBI agents reviewing documents, his client pale and disheveled, and a visibly pregnant young woman crying quietly in the corner. "David, what's happening?" Richard asked. "What's happening," I answered for him, "is that the financial irregularities you've been helping to conceal are finally coming to light." Richard's head snapped toward me. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No?" I retrieved another folder from my portfolio. These transfers from the firm's client trust account to Apex Design Solutions were processed through your personal bank. Your signature appears on the incorporation documents for the shell company. Your law firm handles all the paperwork for the property purchases made with the embezzled funds. For the first time, genuine fear flashed across David's face. Richard had nothing to do with this. "How noble of you to protect your friend," I remarked. "But the paper trail suggests otherwise." Agent Morris collected the new documents I had presented. "Mr. Hayes, are you here as Mr. Blackwell's attorney?" Richard straightened his tie, professional composure returning. "I am, and I advise both my client and Ms. Winters to say nothing further." He turned to David. "We need to talk privately." "I'm afraid that won't be possible at the moment," Agent Thompson interjected. "We're executing a search warrant for financial records and electronic devices. Once that's complete, you can confer with your client." More vehicles arrived outside. A news van from the local station, its satellite dish extending upward. Someone in the neighborhood had called the media. Our private implosion was about to become very public. Amanda moved toward Richard, her pregnancy, making her movements awkward. "I need legal representation too. I don't know what I've been involved in, but I need to protect myself and my baby." Richard looked uncomfortable. "There would be a conflict of interest if I represented both you and David. Especially," I added, "since your own exposure in this situation makes you a potential co-defendant rather than effective counsel for either of them." The look Richard gave me was pure hatred. For 15 years, he had been David's closest friend. The best man at our wedding, a regular guest in our home. Now I had revealed him as a potential accomplice in David's schemes. "You've been planning this for months," David said, staring at me with newfound understanding. "All those questions about my projects, your sudden interest in the firm's clients. You were building a case." "I prefer to think of it as uncovering the truth," I replied. "And yes, it took time to assemble all the pieces, to understand the full scope of what you've been doing. Did you really think I wouldn't notice $4.3 million missing from our joint investment portfolio? Money that apparently funded your lake house in Austin, the one in your brother's name that you take Amanda to for your working weekends?" Amanda's head snapped up. "The lake house belongs to your brother?" "Another shell game," I explained. "Property held by family members, purchased with embezzled funds. It's a classic pattern in fraud cases." Agent Morris turned to Amanda. "Ms. Winters, were you aware of these financial arrangements?" Before she could answer, Richard interjected. "My client advises Ms. Winters not to respond to questions at this time." "He's not my lawyer," Amanda shot back, years of accumulated trust dissolving in minutes. "And he's not speaking for me." She turned to the FBI agents. "I didn't know about any of this. David told me the lake house was an investment property he was considering buying. I never saw any paperwork, never signed anything related to it." "But you did sign documents related to Apex Design Solutions," I noted. "Your signature appears on at least 3 corporate filings and several bank authorizations." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "I signed whatever David put in front of me. He said they were standard new employee forms, project authorizations, that sort of thing. Her hand moved protectively over her belly. I trusted him. Outside, the news crew was setting up a reporter speaking into a microphone on our front lawn. Behind them, more neighbors had gathered, watching the spectacle unfold. 15 years of carefully cultivated respectability were evaporating in real time. The weight of the moment suddenly hit me. The public humiliation, the professional scandal, the end of my marriage in the most spectacular fashion possible. Yet strangely, I felt only a detached calm, as if watching events unfold from a great distance. "Mrs. Blackwell," Agent Morris said, interrupting my thoughts. "We'll need to take formal statements from everyone. Given the complexity of this situation, it might be best to continue this at our field office." I nodded my agreement. "Of course, I've prepared a complete timeline of events with supporting documentation." I reached for my briefcase, the same one I carried to court for high-stakes corporate litigation, and extracted a thumb drive. "This contains digital copies of everything I've given you, plus additional material that may be relevant to your investigation." David lunged forward. "You're not going anywhere with them. This is all a misunderstanding." Agent Thompson stepped between us. "Mr. Blackwell, please remain calm. We're simply gathering information at this stage." "Gathering information?" David's voice rose hysterically. "My wife has been spying on me, breaking into my private files, recording conversations. That's illegal." "Actually," I corrected, "as a co-owner of our home and a joint account holder on our financial records, I have legal access to everything I've provided to the authorities. Nothing was obtained through illegal means." Richard placed a restraining hand on David's arm. "David, stop talking. Now." He turned to the agents. "We'll cooperate fully, but at our field office, not here with the media present." Through the window, I could see the reporter gesturing toward our house, the camera panning across the front of the home we had featured in Architectural Digest just 3 years ago as an example of modern living with classic touches. Another car pulled into the cul-de-sac, a sleek silver Mercedes I recognized as belonging to Mitchell Hammond, the founding partner of my law firm. He had been one of my closest confidants throughout this ordeal, helping me navigate the legal implications of what I'd discovered. "My colleague has arrived," I informed the agents. "He's been advising me on the legal aspects of this situation." David's face contorted with fresh anger. "Mitchell? You brought Mitchell into this?" The betrayal in his voice was almost comical, given the circumstances. "We've had him for dinner dozens of times. He's been my friend for years. He's been my mentor and law partner for longer," I reminded him. "And when I discovered what you've been doing, I needed legal counsel I could trust implicitly." Mitchell was intercepted by the news crew as he approached our front walk. He expertly deflected their questions with a practiced no comment before making his way to the door, which Agent Thompson opened for him. "Catherine," Mitchell greeted me with professional concern. "I came as soon as I saw the news vans heading this way." He surveyed the room, taking in the FBI agents, David's thunderous expression, Richard's professional mask, and Amanda's tear-streaked face. "I see events are unfolding as anticipated." "Right on schedule," I confirmed. "News vans?" David echoed. "How did they even know to come here?" I exchanged a glance with Mitchell. "The federal investigation into the Westside Medical Center contracts has been ongoing for weeks. Once the FBI showed up at the home of one of the principal architects involved, it was inevitable that the media would follow." Mitchell turned to the agents. "I assume you'll want to take formal statements at your field office." Agent Morris nodded. "That would be preferable, given the media presence outside." "Then I suggest we move quickly," Mitchell advised. "I'll accompany Mrs. Blackwell." I gathered my purse and portfolio, feeling strangely light. 6 months of carrying this burden alone, of knowing the truth while maintaining a facade of normalcy, was finally ending. "Wait," Amanda said suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been all afternoon. I want to know one thing before we leave. She turned to face David directly. Was any of it real? Us, I mean? Or was I just convenient? Someone you could manipulate? For your schemes? The room fell silent. Even the FBI agent seemed interested in his answer. David looked at her, then at me, then back at Amanda. For a moment, I thought I glimpsed genuine emotion in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or even a flicker of authentic feeling. But then his attorney mask slipped back into place. Amanda, don't ask me to answer that right now. We'll talk later, in private. Her bitter laugh held years of disillusionment compressed into seconds. That's what I thought. She turned to Agent Morris. I'll cooperate fully. I want to understand exactly what I've been involved in. As we prepared to leave, I paused in our foyer, looking at the life David and I had built together, the art we had collected, the photographs of shared travels, the artifacts of 15 years of partnership. All of it now revealed as an elaborate facade covering rot and deception. Catherine, David called out as I reached the door. Was this your plan all along? To humiliate me publicly? To destroy everything we built? I turned back one last time, meeting his gaze directly. No, David. My plan was simply to uncover the truth. The humiliation and destruction are entirely of your own making. Mitchell placed a steadying hand on my shoulder as we stepped out into the chaos of media shouting questions, neighbors watching wide-eyed, and police attempting to maintain order. The warm autumn afternoon felt surreal against the cold reality of what was happening. Mrs. Blackwell, a reporter called out. Is it true your husband has been arrested for fraud? No comment at this time. Mitchell responded firmly, guiding me toward his car. Behind us, David and Richard emerged, flanked by FBI agents. Amanda followed, her pregnant form drawing all eyes, the visual confirmation of the scandal now unfolding in our exclusive neighborhood. As Mitchell drove us away from the home I had shared with David for 15 years, I watched in the side mirror as my carefully constructed life receded into the distance. By tomorrow, our names would be in headlines, our private failings public knowledge. David's professional reputation would be in ruins, his freedom in jeopardy, and I, the woman who had stood by him for 15 years, would be known as either a victim of his deception or the architect of his downfall. Perhaps both. Are you all right? Mitchell asked quietly as we turned onto the main road. I considered the question carefully. Was I all right? My marriage was over. My husband was facing federal charges. His pregnant mistress had shown up on my doorstep in the most public, humiliating way possible. Yet somehow, I felt more at peace than I had in months. Yes, I said finally. I think I am. The truth, no matter how painful, was finally out. And that was worth everything that would follow. The FBI field office was a stark contrast to my carefully decorated home. All utilitarian furniture, fluorescent lighting, and the faint smell of old coffee. Agent Morris led me to a conference room where a recording device was already set up, a female agent I hadn't met before waiting with a notepad. Mrs. Blackwell, this is Agent Diana Rodriguez, Morris introduced us. She'll be assisting with your statement today. I nodded, setting my briefcase on the conference table. I assume David, Richard, and Amanda are in separate rooms. Standard procedure, Agent Rodriguez confirmed. We find it helps clarify inconsistencies in testimonies. Mitchell Hammond settled into the chair beside me, his presence reassuring. At 58, he embodied the gravitas of a senior law partner. Silver-templed, impeccably dressed, and possessed of a courtroom demeanor that inspired confidence in clients and juries alike. Before we begin, Mitchell said, I want to clarify that while my firm represents Mrs. Blackwell personally, we have no connection to Blackwell & Associates architectural firm or any of the entities mentioned in these allegations. Agent Morris nodded. Understood. We're primarily interested in Mrs. Blackwell's discovery process and the evidence she's gathered. The recording device was activated. and I began my formal statement, chronicling the progression of my discoveries, chronologically. I described finding Amanda's earring in David's car 7 months ago, the tiny gold hoop with a distinctive pearl dangling from it. At that point, I suspected only infidelity, I explained. It was when I began looking more closely at our finances that I noticed discrepancies. What kind of discrepancies? Agent Rodriguez asked. Withdrawals from our joint investment accounts that David attributed to business expansion needs. Unusual transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. When I asked about them, his explanations seemed plausible individually, but collectively formed a pattern that concerned me professionally. You mentioned your professional background earlier, Agent Morris noted. Could you elaborate on that? I'm a senior partner at Hammond, Warner & Price, specializing in corporate litigation with a focus on financial malfeasance and fraud detection. I've represented numerous companies dealing with internal embezzlement and financial misconduct. I detailed how my suspicions had deepened when David began bringing home architectural plans for the Westside Medical Center project, a contract his firm had won despite being significantly outbid by competitors with more healthcare design experience. The turning point came when I overheard a phone conversation between David and James Grayson, I continued. They were discussing how to handle the project oversight committee, specifically mentioning ways to justify cost increases that seemed excessive even by luxury healthcare standards. For the next 2 hours, I walked the agents through my methodical investigation, how I had quietly accessed our shared home computer to review David's emails, followed the paper trail of corporate filings that led to Apex Design Solutions, and eventually discovered the property acquisitions funded through the diverted project money. And when did you become aware of Ms. Winter's pregnancy? Agent Rodriguez asked. Approximately 16 weeks ago, I answered. David received a text message while in the shower. His phone was on the nightstand, and the preview showed a message from Amanda that referenced a doctor's appointment and included the words, "our baby." What actions did you take after learning about the pregnancy? I took a sip of water, organizing my thoughts. The pregnancy actually helped me make connections I had previously missed. David's pattern became clearer. This wasn't his first time using a professional relationship as cover for financial impropriety. Explained how I had tracked down Jessica Connolly, David's second ex-wife, who had worked for him at his previous firm in Colorado. She had described an almost identical scenario: pregnancy, followed by mysterious financial issues at the firm, culminating in a hasty divorce where she was left vulnerable while David emerged unscathed. Ms. Connolly agreed to provide a sworn statement, I added, extracting a notarized document from my briefcase. She details how David manipulated her into signing documents she didn't fully understand while she was distracted by her pregnancy. Agent Morris accepted the statement, scanning it briefly. And you believe David was setting up Ms. Winters in a similar fashion? The parallels are unmistakable, I confirmed. Amanda was hired despite more qualified candidates mysteriously withdrawing. She was rapidly promoted beyond her experience level. And most tellingly, her signature appears on documents for Apex Design Solutions, a company she claims to know nothing about. Mitchell cleared his throat. My client discovered that Ms. Winter's signature appears to have been applied to some documents after the fact, a classic indicator of forgery. And that's when you decided to contact federal authorities? Agent Rodriguez asked. I nodded. When I realized the scope extended beyond our marriage to potentially criminal financial activities, I felt ethically obligated to report it. Particularly since the Westside Medical Center project involves federal healthcare funds. As the formal statement concluded, Agent Morris turned off the recording device. Thank you, Mrs. Blackwell. This is extremely helpful in connecting various aspects of our ongoing investigation. The shift in his tone caught my attention. Ongoing investigation? You were already looking into these matters before I contacted you? Agent Morris exchanged a glance with Rodriguez. We've been investigating James Grayson and certain board members at Westside Medical Center for several months. Your evidence provides valuable connections we had been missing. This was unexpected information. I had assumed my report had initiated the investigation, not supplemented an existing one. Does that mean David was already on your radar? I asked carefully. We were aware of certain irregularities surrounding the contract award, Agent Rodriguez explained. But the financial mechanisms, the shell companies, the property acquisitions, those were missing pieces you've helped provide. Mitchell leaned forward. And Ms. Winter's role in all this? Still being determined, Morris replied. Her statement will help clarify whether she was a knowing participant or an unwitting pawn. A light knock on the door interrupted us. Another agent entered, handing Morris a note. He read it quickly, his expression shifting subtly. Mrs. Blackwell, he said after the agent departed, it appears Ms. Winters is claiming that certain signatures attributed to her were indeed forged. She's offered to provide handwriting samples to prove it. I felt a flicker of vindication. That aligns with my suspicions based on document examination. There's more, Morris continued. She also provided information about a meeting between David Blackwell and James Grayson that took place at the Lake House property. A meeting she wasn't supposed to overhear but did. According to her statement, they discussed explicit quid pro quo arrangements regarding the medical center contracts. This was a significant development. Amanda turning witness against David so quickly suggested she truly had been in the dark about his schemes. And David? I asked. How is he responding to these allegations? Agent Rodriguez's expression remained neutral. Mr. Blackwell is maintaining that any financial irregularities were administrative oversights rather than intentional fraud. His attorney is arguing that this is primarily a private marital matter being mischaracterized due to emotional factors. Emotional factors, I repeated, unable to keep the edge from my voice. A convenient dismissal of evidence he can't otherwise explain. Mitchell placed a calming hand on my arm. What are the next steps in your investigation? We'll be executing additional search warrants at Blackwell and Associates offices tomorrow morning, Morris explained. Electronic devices, financial records, client files, particularly anything related to the Westside Medical Center project. Knock at the door signaled another interruption. This time, a younger agent entered with what appeared to be photographs. Agents, you'll want to see these right away, he said, placing the images on the conference table. The photographs showed David and James Grayson on what appeared to be a boat. The background suggested Lake Travis near Austin. They were examining documents with cash visible in an open briefcase between them. Where did these come from? Morris asked sharply. Just submitted by Ms. Winters, the younger agent explained. Apparently taken on her phone during a weekend, at the lake house 3 months ago. She said she felt something was off about the meeting and documented it secretly. I stared at the images, a strange calm settling over me. Even in the midst of betraying me with Amanda, David had been conducting his illicit business dealings. The compartmentalization was almost impressive in its thoroughness. Does Ms. Winters have more evidence like this? I asked. The agent nodded. She's provided access to her phone and cloud accounts. The tech team is extracting data now. Mitchell and I exchanged glances. Amanda's cooperation would significantly strengthen the case against David and potentially accelerate the timeline of the investigation. Mrs. Blackwell, Agent Morris said, gathering the photographs. We may need additional statements from you as new evidence emerges. In the meantime, have you considered your immediate living arrangements? Your home will likely become a focal point for media attention. I had indeed given this considerable thought during my months of planning. I've secured an apartment in the downtown high-rise my firm keeps for visiting clients. Security is excellent, and media access is restricted. Good, Morris nodded. And I should inform you that Mr. Blackwell will be released tonight pending further investigation. There will be restrictions on his movements and activities, but You should be aware he'll be free to return to your shared home. The thought of David returning to our house, rummaging through my belongings, potentially destroying evidence I hadn't yet discovered, sent a chill through me. Actually, I said, I filed for an emergency temporary restraining order this morning, prior to today's events. Given the confrontational nature of our interaction and the potential for evidence tampering, the judge granted it immediately. I extracted the court order from my briefcase. David is prohibited from entering our home or contacting me directly. Agent Morris accepted the document, eyebrows raised slightly at my foresight. You've been extraordinarily thorough in your preparations, Mrs. Blackwell. 15 years as a litigation attorney, I replied simply. Anticipating contingencies becomes second nature. As Mitchell and I prepared to leave, Agent Rodriguez pulled me aside. One more thing, she said quietly. We've received information that Richard Hayes, David's attorney, has booked a flight to the Cayman Islands leaving tomorrow morning. We're monitoring the situation, but you should be aware that things may develop rapidly in the next 24 hours. This suggested Richard was planning to flee, perhaps to access offshore accounts before they could be frozen. The case was accelerating beyond even my careful projections. Thank you for the information, I replied. I'll make myself available for any further questions. Outside the field office, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Mitchell guided me to his car, keeping a protective arm around my shoulders, as several reporters shouted questions from behind the security perimeter. Quite a day, he observed dryly as we drove away. How are you holding up? I gazed out the window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. Better than I expected, actually. There's a certain relief in finally having everything in. The open. Mitchell nodded, understanding. Have you spoken with Jessica recently? This morning, I confirmed. She's prepared for the media attention that will inevitably come her way once connections to the Colorado firm are made public. Her statement is already notarized and filed with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And the other women? Mitchell asked. Carefully. I turned to look at him. What other women? He kept his eyes on the road, his expression neutral. Our investigator found indications of at least 2 others before Jessica. Similar patterns. Employees or associates who became romantically involved with David, then left suddenly amid financial irregularities. This was new information. Painful, yet somehow unsurprising. David's pattern extended further back than I had discovered. Can we locate them? I asked. Their testimonies could establish a longer history of behavior. Already in progress, Mitchell assured me. This case will likely expand significantly in the coming weeks. As we approached the downtown high-rise where I would be staying, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Thank you for believing me about the forgeries. I truly didn't know what was happening. I'm sorry about showing up at your house like that. I thought. Well, it doesn't matter what I thought. Amanda stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Amanda had been both victim and unwitting accomplice in David's schemes, manipulated personally and professionally, yet her presence in my life represented the most painful aspect of his betrayal. After a moment's consideration, I typed a simple reply, "Truth matters. Protect yourself and your child now." Mitchell pulled into the private garage beneath the high-rise. "Home sweet home, at least for the time being," he said, parking in a reserved space. The building's security officer recognized Mitchell immediately, nodding respectfully as he escorted us to the private elevator that accessed the firm's apartment. The space was impeccably furnished but impersonal, high-end hotel-like accommodations rather than a home. The firm has arranged for additional security, Mitchell informed me as we entered. Given the high-profile nature of the case, we thought it prudent. I set my briefcase down on the gleaming marble countertop, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the day washing over me. What happens tomorrow? The FBI will execute their search warrants at Blackwell and Associates. Our investigator will continue, locating the additional women from David's past. Your divorce filing will be processed. Though with the criminal investigation ongoing, financial aspects will be complicated. I moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city spread. Below, somewhere out there, David was likely meeting with Richard, planning their next moves, perhaps destroying evidence or moving assets. And the media? I asked. Mitchell sighed. That's unavoidable, I'm afraid. By morning, this will be headline news. Prominent. Architect, federal investigation, pregnant mistress. It has all the elements of a story they won't let go easily. The thought of my private humiliation becoming public fodder should have been devastating, yet I felt oddly detached from it. The woman I had been with 6 months ago, the trusting wife, the supportive partner, seemed like a stranger now. Mitchell, I said, turning from the window. There's something I haven't told the FBI yet. He raised an eyebrow, waiting. The night I discovered Amanda's pregnancy, I also found something else on David's phone. A life insurance policy on me. Taken out 3 months ago, significantly increased coverage. The beneficiary is a trust I've never heard of. Controlled by David. Mitchell's expression darkened. You think he was planning? I don't know what he was planning, I interrupted. But given what Jessica told me about her sudden health complications during her pregnancy with David's child, I found it concerning. Enough to document. This changes things, Mitchell said gravely. We should inform the FBI immediately. I nodded agreement, though a part of me wondered if I had subconsciously withheld this information, saving the most damning evidence for when it would be most devastating to David's defense. As Mitchell made the call to Agent Morris, I returned to the window, watching lights flicker across the cityscape. The life I had built so carefully had collapsed in a single afternoon. Yet from the ashes of that destruction, a strange new clarity was emerging. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges. Media, scrutiny, legal proceedings, the continued unraveling of David's schemes. But for the first time in months, I would face those challenges without the burden of secrets and suspicions weighing me down. The truth, no matter how painful, had finally been set free. I awoke at 5:30 a.m. to the insistent buzzing of my phone. Dozens of notifications illuminated the screen. Missed calls, text messages, news alerts. The story had broken overnight, exactly as Mitchell had predicted. Steeling myself, I opened the local news app to find David's firm headlining the morning. Coverage. Prominent architect under federal investigation. Fraud allegations and pregnant mistress rock elite firm. Below the headline was a split-screen image. On one side, David and I at a charity gala 6 months earlier, both smiling in formal attire. On the other, yesterday's scene of FBI agents escorting David from our home while a visibly pregnant Amanda followed behind. The article quoted sources close to the investigation, claiming that millions had been embezzled through fraudulent contracting practices. David's attorney had provided a statement declaring his client's innocence and decrying the vindictive actions of an estranged wife manipulating federal authorities during a private marital dispute. I scrolled through additional coverage, each outlet adding their own sensational angle. One particularly invasive piece had already dug up David's previous marriages, highlighting the pattern of workplace relationships and subsequent divorces. My phone rang, Mitchell calling for our scheduled morning briefing. Have you seen the coverage? He asked without preamble. Just skimming the headlines, I replied, moving to the kitchen to start coffee. David's team is pushing the vindictive wife narrative hard. Expected, Mitchell said. But they have bigger problems. Richard Hayes never boarded his flight to the Caymans this morning. The FBI intercepted him at the airport with $250,000 in cash and bearer bonds in his briefcase. This was a significant development. Richard's attempted flight suggested panic and likely indicated that David's legal team was fracturing under pressure. Has he been arrested? I asked. Detained for questioning, Mitchell clarified. They're executing a warrant on his law offices as we speak. But there's more. The FBI raid on Blackwell and Associates uncovered a hidden server containing emails that had been deleted from the main system. Technical team is going through them now. I sipped my coffee, gazing out at the city awakening below. Any word on David's whereabouts? That's the concerning part, Mitchell said, his voice dropping. He violated the terms of his release by not checking in with authorities this morning. His phone's been turned off since midnight. They're looking for him. A chill ran through me despite the hot coffee. David was many things, but not typically impulsive. Disappearing now suggested either panic or premeditation. What about Amanda? I asked. Under protective custody after the life insurance information you shared. They're taking no chances. A knock at the apartment door interrupted our conversation. Through the peephole, I could see a uniformed security officer from the building. Let me call you back, I told Mitchell, ending the call to answer the door. Mrs. Blackwell, the security officer said respectfully. I wanted to inform you that several news crews have gathered in the lobby. We're not confirming your presence in the building, but I thought you should be aware. Thank you, I replied. Has anyone attempted to come up? No, ma'am. Access to this floor remains restricted. But there was one development you should know about. A delivery arrived for you early this morning. He handed me a small package, a padded envelope that had already been scanned by building security. The return address showed David's mother's nursing home. Closing the door, I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note in a shaky scrawl I recognized as Eleanor Blackwell's distinctive penmanship. Catherine, David visited last night. Very upset. Left this with me for safekeeping, but I don't trust what's happening. You were always kind to me, unlike his previous wives. Do what's right. Eleanor, the USB drive felt unexpectedly heavy in my palm, potentially containing evidence David had attempted to hide from authorities. I immediately called Mitchell back. David's mother sent me a USB drive he left with her last night, I explained. I haven't accessed it yet. Mitchell's response was immediate. Don't open it. We need to turn it over to the FBI intact. The chain of custody is critical if it contains evidence. Within the hour, Agent Rodriguez arrived at the apartment, carefully placing the USB drive and Eleanor's note into evidence bags. This could be significant, she told me. Mrs. Blackwell Sr. has already contacted us this morning, expressing concerns about her son's behavior during his visit last night. She described him as agitated and making alarming statements. I had always maintained a cordial relationship with Eleanor, visiting her regularly at the nursing home despite David's increasingly infrequent appearances there. Her dementia came and went in waves, but her moral compass remained surprisingly intact. Did she elaborate on what those alarming statements entailed? I asked. Agent Rodriguez consulted her notes. According to the nursing staff who overheard portions of their conversation, David mentioned starting over and needing to clean house. He also asked about access to family property in Minnesota, apparently a lake cabin that belonged to his grandparents. The Minnesota cabin, I had forgotten about its existence. David had mentioned it once early in our marriage, dismissing it as worthless property in the middle of nowhere. Yet now he was asking about it while possibly fleeing legal consequences. That property hasn't been used in decades, I said, but it's remote, isolated. If he's looking to disappear temporarily, Rodriguez nodded. We've already alerted local authorities in the area. If he attempts to use the property, they'll be ready. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I was about to ignore it when something made me reconsider. Excuse me, I said to Agent Rodriguez, answering the call. Hello? Catherine, it's Jessica Connolly. David's second ex-wife's voice was tense. I think you should know David contacted my son last night. He's never done that before. Hasn't shown any interest in Tyler for almost 14 years. This was unexpected. David had walked away from Jessica's pregnancy, never acknowledging the child as his, even refusing paternity testing as part of their divorce settlement. What did he want? I asked. He told Tyler he wanted to make things right and suggested they might take a trip together soon. Catherine, he's never even sent a birthday card and suddenly he's talking about trips? It feels wrong. Agent Rodriguez was watching me intently, clearly noting the concern in my expression. Jessica, I'm going to put you on speaker. I have an FBI agent with me who needs to hear this. After Jessica repeated the information for Rodriguez, the agent's demeanor shifted to heightened alert. Mrs. Connolly, where is your son now? She asked. At school. I've already called the administration to ensure he's not released to anyone but me. But why would David suddenly reach out to him after all these years? A disturbing possibility formed in my mind. Leverage, I said quietly. Or distraction. If David's planning to flee, having his biological son with him changes the nature of the pursuit. It's no longer just a fugitive case. It becomes a custody issue, potentially even triggering an Amber Alert if the circumstances are manipulated correctly. Rodriguez was already on her phone, issuing rapid instructions to increase security around Jessica's son and residence. After finishing her call, she turned back to me. We're treating this as a significant development. Mr. Blackwell's interest in both the remote property and his previously unacknowledged son suggests he may be preparing for extended evasion of authorities. After Rodriguez departed with the USB evidence, I found myself alone in the sterile apartment, the weight of the situation pressing down with new urgency. David wasn't simply running from financial crimes anymore. His behavior suggested something more desperate and potentially dangerous. My phone rang again. This time Mitchell called back. The FBI just updated me, he said. They're treating David as a flight risk now. It's worse than that, I replied, detailing Jessica's call about David contacting his son. Mitchell, this isn't just panic. This feels calculated. I agree, he said gravely. And there's something else you should know. Our investigator located another woman from David's past, Vanessa Reynolds. She worked at his Denver firm before Jessica. According to preliminary conversations, she also became pregnant during their relationship. I sat down heavily on the sofa. What happened? She lost the baby after a suspicious fall down a staircase at the office. No witnesses, but she had just confronted David about financial discrepancies she'd discovered in the firm's accounts. The implications were chilling. A pattern was emerging that went beyond financial fraud and infidelity into potentially violent territory. Mitchell, we need to warn Amanda, I said, surprising myself with the concern I felt for the woman who had shown up pregnant on my doorstep just yesterday. If David feels cornered and is growing desperate? Already happening, he assured me. After the life insurance policy information you provided, the FBI increased her protective custody status. She's in a secure location. A breaking news alert flashed across my phone. Architect's attorney detained. Richard Hayes caught attempting to flee country. I opened the article to find Richard's professional headshot alongside details of his airport apprehension. The piece mentioned the cash and bearer bonds, along with documents relevant to the ongoing investigation into Blackwell and Associates. Mitchell and I spoke for another hour, developing a strategy for the inevitable media onslaught. As a senior partner in a prestigious law firm, my professional reputation was at stake alongside my personal humiliation. We drafted a brief statement emphasizing my cooperation with authorities and requesting privacy during the investigation. Just as we finished, Agent Morris called with an update. Mrs. Blackwell, we've accessed the USB drive from David's mother. It contains what appears to be a complete backup of financial records, emails, and project files, including documentation of additional projects beyond Westside Medical Center that involved similar financial irregularities. He gave his mother evidence against himself? I asked, confused. Not intentionally, it seems, Morris clarified. The drive contains multiple folders. Some appear to be evidence he was gathering to build a case against his partners, attempting to shift blame, but he included files he clearly didn't mean to share. This aligned with David's character, always looking for ways to deflect responsibility. Even now, facing serious federal charges, he was planning to sacrifice others to save himself. "There's something else," Morris continued. "We found a folder containing surveillance photos of you over the past several months. Times when you were meeting with your investigator, visiting his mother, even entering the FBI building yesterday." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "He's been following me?" "It appears so. The metadata on the photos suggests they were taken by a professional surveillance operative. We're working to identify who he hired." The revelation was deeply unsettling. While I had been quietly investigating David, he had apparently been monitoring me as well, a parallel counterintelligence operation in our disintegrating marriage. "Agent Morris," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Given this development, do you believe I'm in any immediate danger?" "We're taking precautions," he replied, not directly answering the question. "Additional security is being arranged for your location, but until we locate Mr. Blackwell, it would be prudent to maintain heightened awareness." After the call ended, I moved to the window, scanning the streets below with new paranoia. Had David been watching me even this morning? Did he know I was staying in the firm's apartment? My phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. Did you think I wouldn't notice? All those questions, the accidental discoveries of documents I'd hidden. "You've always underestimated me, Catherine. This isn't over." I immediately called Agent Rodriguez, forwarding her the message before deleting it from my phone. "Can you trace it?" I asked. "We'll try, but he's likely using a burner phone," she replied. "The good news is that contact gives us probable cause for additional surveillance measures. I'm sending an agent to your location immediately." True to her word, within 20 minutes, a plainclothes FBI agent arrived at the apartment. Agent Thomas Miller introduced himself as my security detail, professionally setting up in the apartment's second bedroom, where he could monitor building access. By mid-afternoon, the media coverage had intensified. A former employee of Blackwell and associates had given an interview describing the culture of fear and financial secrecy at the firm. David's senior partners had issued a statement distancing themselves from him, claiming to be shocked and appalled by the allegations. Mitchell arrived with takeout dinner, his expression grave as he set down the bags of food. "The partners at David's firm are turning on each other," he informed me. "Two of them have approached the FBI seeking immunity deals in exchange for testimony. The whole operation is unraveling." I pushed the food around my plate, appetite diminished by stress and uncertainty. "Any word on David's whereabouts?" "Nothing confirmed," Mitchell said. "But there's been activity on one of his credit cards, a gas station purchase near the Wisconsin border. He could be heading toward that Minnesota property." My phone rang. Jessica. Connolly again. "Catherine," she said, her voice trembling. "Someone tried to pick Tyler up from school, a woman claiming to be his aunt. When the school called me to verify, she disappeared." "Are you and Tyler safe?" I asked immediately. "Yes, we're with the police now." "But Catherine, the description the school provided matches David's sister Meredith. Meredith Blackwell, David's fiercely loyal older sister who had always treated me with barely concealed contempt. The same sister who had helped David erase all records of his previous marriages when he moved to establish his new firm. "Jessica, don't go home," I advised. "Ask the police about temporary protective custody until David is located." After relaying this development to Agent Miller, I returned to the living room where Mitchell waited with concern etched on his features. "It's escalating," I said simply, sinking onto the sofa. "David's involving family members now." Mitchell nodded grimly. "The FBI just called me. They've formally classified David as a fugitive. His face will be on every news outlet within the hour." Sure enough, breaking news alerts began flooding my phone. "Architect flees. David Blackwell, now fugitive from justice." The accompanying photo showed David in his element. Confident, charismatic, addressing a crowd at a design awards ceremony last year. The image was jarringly incongruous, with the man now fleeing federal authorities, possibly attempting to abduct his biological son, in the process. As darkness fell over the city, I found myself standing at the window again, watching lights twinkle across the skyline. Just 72 hours ago, I had been preparing for another week of pretending, maintaining the facade of a happy marriage while quietly building my case. Now, everything was exposed, the carefully constructed lies torn away to reveal the ugly truth beneath. My phone chimed with yet another news alert. Breaking: fugitive architect's vehicle found abandoned near Minnesota border. The walls were closing in on David. His escape options dwindled by the hour. And somewhere out there, he was growing more desperate. A dangerous man with nothing left to lose. Agent Miller appeared from the second bedroom. "Mrs. Blackwell, we've received information that your husband has been making calls to mutual acquaintances, asking about your whereabouts. We're implementing additional security protocols immediately." The hunter had become the hunted, but in that reversal lay new danger. David had always been at his most unpredictable when cornered. As Agent Miller secured the apartment, checking windows and doors, I realized with perfect clarity that this story was far from over. The dramatic revelation on my doorstep had set in motion events that would continue to unfold in increasingly dangerous ways. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, David was planning his next move. Dawn broke over the city with an eerie red glow, casting the skyscrapers in crimson light that felt oddly appropriate given the circumstances. I had barely slept, drifting in and out of restless dreams where David lurked in shadows, always just out of sight, but watching. Agent Miller had maintained his vigilant position throughout the night, occasionally receiving updates via his secure phone. By 6 a.m., he had news to share? "Mrs. Blackwell," he said, entering the living room where I sat with my third cup of coffee. "There have been developments overnight. David's vehicle was found abandoned near Duluth, but security cameras at a nearby marina captured footage of him boarding a private boat registered to James Grayson. He's trying to cross into Canada via Lake Superior," I surmised, the pieces clicking together. "The Minnesota cabin was just a diversion." Miller nodded. "Border Patrol and Coast Guard have been alerted, but it's a vast area to cover. There's something else. The FBI tech team finished analyzing the hidden server from Blackwell and Associates. They found communications suggesting a much wider network of corruption than initially suspected." "Wider how?" I asked, setting down my coffee. The fraudulent practices extended beyond the Westside Medical Center to at least 6 other major projects over the past 4 years. And the participants included not just David and his partners, but also city zoning officials, inspection officers, even 2 state legislators who helped secure public funding. This expanded the case significantly, from fraud involving a single healthcare facility to systematic corruption infecting multiple public projects. The implications were staggering. "What about Richard Hayes?" I asked, thinking of David's attorney, who had been caught attempting to flee. "He's talking," Miller confirmed. "After being confronted with evidence from the server, he's negotiating a cooperation agreement. Preliminary information suggests he was more than just David's attorney. He was actively facilitating the movement of funds through shell companies and offshore accounts." My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Mitchell. "I'm heading to your location," he said without preamble. "The FBI has requested your presence at their field office. New evidence has emerged that they want you to review." "What kind of evidence?" "They wouldn't say over the phone," Mitchell replied, "but it involves documents recovered from a storage unit rented under Eleanor Blackwell's name. A facility manager recognized David's photo on the news and contacted authorities. Within the hour, Mitchell and I were being escorted through the FBI field office to a conference room where Agents Morris and Rodriguez waited. Spread across the table were dozens of file folders, each labeled with project names and dates. "Mrs. Blackwell," Agent Morris greeted me. "Thank you for coming in. We've uncovered what appears to be David's insurance policy, a comprehensive record of everyone involved in his schemes, along with evidence that could implicate them. Blackmail material, I surmised, surveying the meticulously organized documentation. Precisely, Rodriguez confirmed. David kept detailed records of every participant's involvement, recordings of conversations, copies of fraudulent documents with their signatures, photographs of meetings. He was protecting himself by ensuring he could take everyone else down, if necessary. I selected a folder labeled West Side Medical Center and opened it to find photographs of James Grayson accepting an envelope from David, followed by banking records showing large deposits to Grayson's offshore account corresponding to contract award dates. I began searching for words. The smoking gun, Morris finished for me. And it's just one project of many. The scope of corruption is remarkable. Construction companies inflating costs, inspectors ignoring code violations, officials fast-tracking approvals in exchange for kickbacks. Mitchell reviewed another folder. These documents could lead to dozens of indictments beyond just David and his immediate associates. Which is why we believe he's become such a high-flight risk, Rodriguez added. David isn't just fleeing the charges related to your evidence. He's running from the potential fallout of this entire network being exposed. I processed this information, seeing David's actions in a new light. So when he realized I was investigating him, he likely feared you would eventually uncover this wider conspiracy, Morris confirmed. That's what makes your situation particularly concerning from a security standpoint. You're not just a witness to fraud. You're a threat to an entire system of corruption that extends into local government. A chill ran through me as I fully grasped the implications. David wasn't acting alone in his desperation. He potentially had allies within law enforcement, city government, and private industry who were equally motivated to silence threats. Have you been able to identify everyone involved? I asked. Rodriguez shook her head. We're still processing the evidence. Some participants used code names or communicated through intermediaries, but we've identified enough key players to understand the structure. David and Richard Hayes served as facilitators, connecting business interests with government officials who could provide necessary approvals or overlooked regulatory issues. As we continued reviewing folders, a pattern emerged. Each project followed nearly identical formulas for kickbacks, shell companies, and distribution of fraudulent proceeds. David's organizational skills, so valuable in his architectural practice, had been perfectly adapted to systematizing corruption. There's something else we discovered, Morris said, sliding a thin folder toward me. Unlike the others, this one bore no project name, just my initials, KSB. Inside were surveillance photos spanning the past 6 months, me meeting with my private investigator, consulting with Mitchell, entering the FBI building. But more disturbingly, there were also photographs from years earlier. Me visiting Jessica, Connolly, me researching David's first divorce at the county records office, me having lunch with a former employee of David's firm who had quietly shared concerns about financial irregularities. He's been watching me for years, I realized, the timeline snapping into focus. Not just since I began actively investigating him, but monitoring potential threats all along. It appears so, Morris agreed. The earliest surveillance photos date back nearly 4 years. You may have noticed his suspicious activities long before you consciously acknowledged them. This revelation was profoundly unsettling, suggesting that even during periods when our marriage had seemed stable and trusting, David had been maintaining covert surveillance on me, cataloging potential threats to his schemes. There's more, Rodriguez said quietly, turning to the final page in the folder. It contained a typed document titled Contingency Plan KSB. The contents made my blood run cold, a detailed strategy for discrediting me if I ever raised concerns about his business practices, including plans to suggest mental instability, manufacture evidence of an affair, and if necessary, arrange An accident that would appear to be the result of my increasing recklessness. Mitchell read over my shoulder, his face hardening. This goes beyond fraud into conspiracy to commit harm. Precisely why we've upgraded the threat assessment. Morris confirmed. Your husband wasn't just planning to discredit you. He was developing options to eliminate you if necessary. A knock at the conference room door interrupted our grim discovery. Another agent entered, speaking quietly to Morris, whose expression shifted to heightened alert. We've just received information that David has been spotted, Morris announced. Not heading north toward Canada as we suspected, but south. A gas station security camera in Iowa captured him approximately 3 hours ago. Iowa? I echoed, confused by this unexpected direction. It gets more concerning, Morris continued. He wasn't alone. The footage shows him with a woman matching Meredith Blackwell's description, and they appeared to be traveling in a recreational vehicle registered to her husband. What about Jessica's son? I asked immediately, remembering the attempted school pickup. Safe with his mother in protective custody, Rodriguez assured me. But this development suggests David may have alternative plans we haven't anticipated, my Dian. Mind raced, trying to think like David, always strategic, always planning several moves ahead. If not Canada, and not his son, what was drawing him south? Mexico, I said suddenly, the realization clicking into place. James Grayson has a vacation property in Cabo San Lucas. David mentioned it once, said it was off the grid, accessible only by private road, with a boat dock for direct ocean access. Morris was immediately on his phone, relaying this information to operational teams. Meanwhile, Mitchell pulled me aside. Catherine, given these developments, we need to discuss your safety more comprehensively. This goes beyond witness protection now. David has documented plans to harm you, and he's involving family members in his flight. I nodded, the reality of my situation sinking in with new weight. What are you suggesting? The FBI has a secure facility where you can stay until David is apprehended. Complete media blackout, no digital footprint, round-the-clock security. The thought of essentially disappearing from my life, even temporarily, was jarring. But the evidence spread across. The conference table left little room for half measures. How soon? I asked. Immediately, Mitchell replied. We shouldn't return to the apartment. Anything you need can be purchased or retrieved by agents. As Mitchell coordinated with Morris about the secure facility arrangements, my phone buzzed. With a text from an unlisted number. I need to speak with you urgently. It's about David and what he's planning. Meet me at St. Michael's Church at noon. Come alone. This isn't a trap. I'm trying to help. Amanda, my instinct was to immediately show the text to the agents, but something gave me pause. The mention of St. Michael's Church was significant. It was where David and I had gotten married 15 years ago, a detail Amanda was unlikely to know unless she had learned it from David himself. Agent Rodriguez, I called, making my decision. I've just received a text from Amanda Winters. She wants to meet at St. Michael's Church at noon, says it's about David's plans. Rodriguez took my phone, examining the message. This could be legitimate, or it could be someone using her identity to lure you out. I thought the same, I acknowledged. But the choice of location is significant. That church has a personal, meaning that isn't public knowledge. Morris joined the conversation. Ms. Winters is supposed to be in protective custody. Let me verify her status. After a brief call, his expression was grim. She left the safe house this morning. Told the agents she needed to attend a prenatal appointment. Never arrived at the doctor's office. Could David have gotten to her? Mitchell asked. Possibly, Morris admitted. Or she could be cooperating with him voluntarily. Her loyalty has been difficult to assess throughout this investigation. I considered the possibilities. If this is a genuine attempt to provide information about David's plans, it could be crucial. If it's a trap, we're not risking your safety either way, Rodriguez stated firmly. But we can set up a controlled meeting, surveillance teams, undercover agents in place, real-time monitoring. The plan came together quickly. I would appear to arrive alone at the church, but every aspect of the meeting would be monitored by FBI personnel positioned throughout the area. I would wear a concealed recording device, and a tactical team would be ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble. As preparations were made, I found myself wondering about Amanda's motivation. Was she truly trying to help, perhaps feeling remorse for her role in the unfolding drama? Or had David somehow coerced her into setting a trap, using her pregnancy as leverage? By 11:30, I was sitting in an unmarked FBI vehicle a block from St. Michael's Church. The Gothic Revival building with its imposing spire had once represented the beginning of my life with David. Now it might serve as the setting for resolving the dangerous end of our relationship. "Remember," Agent Rodriguez instructed as a technician fitted the miniature recording device to the collar of my blouse, "maintain distance from her. Don't agree to go anywhere else. If she suggests moving to another location, that's an immediate red flag." I nodded, surprisingly calm despite the circumstances. After months of investigating David's deceptions, followed by the whirlwind revelations of the past 2 days, this controlled confrontation felt almost manageable by comparison. "We have visuals on the church," a voice reported through Rodriguez's earpiece. "No sign of Winters yet, but there's a pregnant woman matching her description approaching from the east side of the park." Rodriguez showed me the tablet displaying security camera footage. Even from a distance, Amanda's distinctive walk and silhouette were recognizable. "She appears to be alone," the voice continued. "No visual on anyone accompanying or surveilling her." "It's time," Rodriguez said, squeezing my arm supportively. "We're with you every step of the way." I exited the vehicle and walked the short block to the church, conscious of being watched not just by FBI agents but potentially by David or his associates as well. The spring air carried the scent of newly bloomed flowers from the adjacent park, an incongruously pleasant detail in such a tense moment. The heavy wooden doors of St. Michael's stood open, cool air from the stone interior spilling out into the sunshine. I paused at the threshold, allowing my eyes to adjust to the dimmer light within. The nave was empty, except for an elderly man praying quietly in a front pew and a familiar pregnant figure sitting midway down the right side. Amanda turned as my footsteps echoed on the stone floor. Her face showed the strain of recent days, dark circles under her eyes, her normally perfect makeup absent, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail rather than her usual styled waves. "Catherine," she said as I approached, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." I maintained the recommended distance, sitting in the pew behind her rather than beside her. "Your message said it was urgent, about David's plans." She nodded, glancing nervously around the empty church. "I left protective custody because I received a call from David early this morning. He told me things that frightened me. Not threats, exactly, but implications." "What kind of implications?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "He said that by this time tomorrow, everyone would understand why he had done what he did, that the corrupt system would be exposed, even if he wasn't around to see it." Her hand moved protectively over her belly. "It sounded like he was planning something destructive, something final." A chill ran through me as I processed her words. They carried the ominous tone of someone planning a last dramatic gesture, possibly something violent. Did he give any specific details? Locations, times, people involved? She shook her head. "Not directly. But he mentioned that the truth about Westside Medical Center would come out one way or another. And he asked if I'd received the package he sent me. This was new information." "What package?" "I don't know. Nothing has arrived." But after hanging up, I realized his tone was different, resolved, like someone who had made a final decision. She looked up at me, genuine fear in her eyes. "Catherine, I think he's planning something terrible, at the medical center, or involving the people connected to it. That's why I contacted you instead of the FBI directly. I thought you might understand the context better. I absorbed this information, recognizing its potential significance. If David was indeed planning some dramatic final act focused on the medical center, it could endanger countless innocent people. Amanda, I said carefully, I appreciate you sharing this, but we need to bring in the FBI now. This goes beyond you and me, beyond even David's legal situation. To my surprise, she nodded in agreement. I know. That's why I chose a public place to meet you. I figured you wouldn't come alone, that you'd have agents watching. I'm ready to tell them everything, including things I haven't shared before about conversations I overheard between David and James Grayson. As if on cue, Agent Rodriguez appeared at the end of the pew, having monitored our conversation through my recording device. Ms. Winters, she said formally, we'd like to take your full statement regarding this morning's call from David Blackwell and any other information you have. Amanda rose awkwardly, her pregnancy making the movement difficult. Of course, and I can show you the call log on my phone to confirm the time and duration. As we walked toward the church exit, Amanda suddenly stopped, turning back to me. Catherine, there's something else. Something personal I need to say. I waited, unsure what could be left between us after everything that had happened. I'm sorry, she said simply, not just for showing up at your door like that, but for believing David's lies about your marriage. He told me you were cold, career-obsessed, uninterested in building a family. Now I see he was projecting his own coldness onto you, creating a narrative that justified his actions. The apology was unexpected, and I found myself uncertain how to respond. This woman had been both victim and unwitting accomplice in David's schemes, manipulated personally and professionally just as I had been, albeit in different ways. We were both deceived, I said finally, by a man who constructed elaborate fictions to serve his purposes. What matters now is stopping whatever he's planning next. As we emerged from the church into the bright midday sun, the weight of David's potential final act hung heavily between us. Whatever he was planning at or involving the Westside Medical Center, time was clearly running short to prevent it. And somewhere out there, with his sister and unknown allies, David was moving closer to his mysterious endgame. The FBI field office hummed with heightened activity as Amanda provided a formal statement about her morning call with David. Agents cross-referenced her phone records with cell tower data, confirming that David had indeed called from somewhere in southern Iowa approximately 4 hours earlier. The call lasted 6 minutes and 12 seconds, Agent Morris noted, reviewing the digital records. And you're certain he specifically mentioned the Westside Medical Center? Amanda nodded, hands protectively cradling her belly. He said, the truth about Westside will come out one way or another. His tone was resolute, like someone who had accepted whatever consequences might come. Did he mention any specific time frame? Rodriguez pressed. Any indication of when this truth would emerge? He said, by this time tomorrow, Amanda recalled. That was the phrase that frightened me most. It sounded like a deadline. I sat quietly, observing the debriefing while trying to puzzle through David's possible intentions. The Westside Medical Center was nearly complete, scheduled to open. In 3 weeks, with a ribbon-cutting ceremony that would have featured David prominently as the lead architect. Now that the ceremony would undoubtedly be canceled, the project was tainted by the fraud investigation. What's the current status of the medical center construction? I asked suddenly. An agent consulting a laptop quickly pulled up information. Final inspections were conducted last week. Interior finishing work is still underway in the East Wing. Medical equipment installation begins tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. A potential timeline began forming in my mind. So the building is essentially complete but not yet operational. No patients but likely construction workers and soon medical equipment technicians. Agent Morris caught my train of thought. You think the building itself might be the target? It would be symbolic, I noted. The crown jewel of David's recent projects, now the instrument of his downfall. If he wanted to make a final statement about the truth coming out, destroying or damaging the physical evidence of the fraud might appeal to him. Rodriguez immediately began issuing orders for a full security sweep of the medical center and suspension of all work until further notice. Meanwhile, a technical analyst approached with new information. "We've identified the package Ms. Winters mentioned," he reported. "Surveillance footage from a shipping store in Duluth shows David mailing something yesterday morning. Based on the shipping label visible in the footage, it's addressed to Ms. Winters' apartment, scheduled for delivery today." "Intercept it immediately," Morris directed. "Full hazmat protocols until we determine contents." The urgency in his voice reflected what we were all thinking. If David was planning something destructive, the package could contain anything from incriminating evidence to something far more dangerous. Mitchell pulled me aside as the operational teams mobilized. "Catherine, they want to place you in a secure facility now. This development with the medical center significantly escalates the threat assessment." I understood the necessity but felt a growing resistance to being sidelined. "I've been investigating David for months. I understand how he thinks, what motivates him. I could be valuable in anticipating his next moves. Or you could be his primary target," Mitchell countered gently. "The contingency plan we found makes clear that he's considered harming you if necessary. With everything collapsing around him, necessary may have a much lower threshold now." Before I could respond, my phone rang. An unknown number with a Minnesota area code. "Put it on speaker," Agent Rodriguez instructed, moving quickly to my side as I answered. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Catherine." Eleanor Blackwell's wavering voice came through clearly despite her age. "I need to tell you something important. About David." Rodriguez nodded for me to continue while she signaled for a trace on the call. "Eleanor, are you all right? Where are you calling from?" "My nursing home, dear. The nice FBI agents have been here asking questions, but I remembered something after they left. Something David said during his visit." I glanced at Rodriguez, who gave me an encouraging nod. "What did he say, Eleanor?" "He mentioned the groundbreaking ceremony, said it was poetic justice, that everything would come full circle, back to where it all started. I didn't understand what he meant then, but I've been thinking about it." My mind raced. The groundbreaking ceremony for the West Side Medical Center had taken place exactly 2 years ago. A major media event where David had shared the spotlight with James Grayson and various officials, including the governor. "Did he mention anything specific about the ceremony, Eleanor? Any details at all?" There was a pause, the sound of labored breathing as she concentrated. "He said something about foundations. How appropriate it was that the truth was buried in the foundation. Does that make sense to you, dear?" It did. With sudden, chilling clarity. The foundation of the medical center had been poured shortly after groundbreaking, the massive concrete structure setting the literal and figurative base for everything that followed. "Thank you, Eleanor. That's extremely helpful," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm. "Is there anything else you remember?" "Just that he seemed sad when he mentioned you. Said he wished things could have been different, that you could have been partners in every sense." I thought it was strange, considering how angry he'd been earlier. After ensuring Eleanor was safe and thanking her again, I turned to the assembled agents. "The foundation of the medical center. That's what he's referring to. Something is buried there, something that would expose the entire network. Or something that could destroy it," Morris added grimly. "Depending on his ultimate goal." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The FBI deployed their structural assessment team to the medical center, equipped with ground-penetrating radar and other specialized equipment to examine the foundation without compromising structural integrity. Meanwhile, the package David had sent to Amanda was intercepted and taken to a secure facility for examination. I found myself standing at the window of the conference room, watching rain begin to fall over the city. The weather matched my growing sense of foreboding, dark clouds gathering, obscuring what had been clear skies just hours before. Mrs. Blackwell. Agent Morris's voice pulled me from my thoughts. We've located David's sister, Meredith. Highway Patrol stopped the RV in Missouri, but David wasn't with her. She was a diversion, I realized immediately. He anticipated we would track family members and used her to create a false trail south while he went, where? That's what we're trying to determine from Ms. Blackwell now. But there's something else. The package intended for Ms. Winters has been examined. It contained USB drives and hard copies of documents that appear to detail the entire fraud scheme, along with a letter addressed to her. Amanda, who had been resting in an adjacent room, was brought in to hear this development. What did the letter say? She asked, her face pale with exhaustion and stress. Agent Rodriguez handed her a copy of the letter, now preserved in an evidence bag. Amanda read aloud. Amanda, by the time you receive this, events will be in motion that cannot be stopped. These documents prove that I was not the mastermind, but merely a participant in a system of corruption that preceded me and will continue after I'm gone, unless the truth is revealed. Catherine was right to investigate, but she only uncovered part of the story. The complete truth lies in the foundation of everything we built. I regret involving you in this mess. Take care of our child. They deserve better than the legacy I'm leaving behind. David. The letter confirmed my theory, while raising new questions. If David saw himself as merely a participant rather than a mastermind, who did he believe was truly behind the corruption network? The structural assessment team has reached the medical center, Morris announced, checking his phone. Initial ground-penetrating radar scans of the foundation show an anomaly in the southeast corner, something embedded in the concrete that doesn't match the structural plans. What kind of anomaly? Rodriguez asked. Unknown at this time. They're bringing in more specialized equipment to get a clearer image without compromising the structure. Mitchell, who had been coordinating with my firm's security team, approached with his own update. Catherine, we've received a concerning report from your home security system. Someone attempted to access the property 20 minutes ago, disabled the front gate but triggered a silent alarm. This was unexpected, with David presumably focused on whatever he had planned for the medical center. Why would anyone be targeting our house? Do we have security footage? I asked. Being transmitted now, Mitchell confirmed, turning to a nearby screen where a technician was pulling up the video feed. The grainy nighttime footage showed a figure in dark clothing approaching our front gate, expertly disabling the electronic lock, then proceeding toward the house. The camera angle shifted to the front door, where the figure worked on the lock with professional efficiency before disappearing inside. Can we enhance the image? Agent Morris requested. Get a clearer view of the face? The technician worked, the controls, zooming and enhancing until the figure's features became distinguishable despite the baseball cap pulled low. That's not David, I said immediately, recognizing the face despite the poor quality. That's Andrew Colton, one of the senior project managers at David's firm. Rodriguez was immediately on her phone, dispatching agents to the house. Any idea what he might be looking for? I thought carefully. What could be in our home that would be worth risking breaking and entering while a federal manhunt was underway? The safe room, I realized suddenly. David converted a space off our bedroom into a secure room after a series of home invasions in the neighborhood 3 years ago. I rarely go in there. It's primarily his space for valuable documents and items. Does he have documentation there that might implicate others? Morris asked. Possibly, I acknowledged. But more concerning, he might have kept evidence there. That could help him execute whatever he's planning at the medical center. As we processed this new development, another agent entered with an update from the structural assessment team. They've got a clearer image of the anomaly in the foundation, he reported, placing a tablet on the conference table. It appears to be some kind of container approximately 2 feet by 3 feet, embedded in the concrete during the initial pour. The thermal imaging on the screen showed a distinct rectangular shape within the larger mass of the foundation, something that clearly didn't belong in the structural design. A container that size could hold almost anything, Mitchell observed. Documents, electronic devices, or explosives, Morris finished grimly, with a timer or remote detonation mechanism. The possibility hung heavy in the air. If David had embedded explosives in the foundation during construction, set to detonate on his command, the damage could be catastrophic, not just to the building itself, but potentially to the surrounding medical campus. "We need to evacuate the entire area," Rodriguez said immediately, "and bring in the bomb squad." As evacuation orders were issued, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. The number was blocked, but the message left no doubt about its sender. "You always were the clever one, Catherine. But you're still missing pieces of the puzzle. The foundation holds the truth, but not in the way you think. 18 hours until everyone understands. Stay away from the house. It's not safe anymore. Despite everything, I never wanted you hurt." DI showed the message to the agents, my hands surprisingly steady despite the implicit threat. "He's confirming something is happening in 18 hours, Morris noted, checking his watch. "That would be approximately 10 a.m. tomorrow. And he's warning me away from the house," I added, "which means whatever Andrew Colton is looking for there could be dangerous." Rodriguez immediately updated the teams heading to my house, upgrading the response to include hazardous materials specialists. Meanwhile, the bomb squad was en route to the medical center to assess the mysterious container embedded in the foundation. Amanda, who had been listening to these developments with increasing distress, suddenly gasped and pressed her hand to her belly. "Are you all right?" I asked, surprised by my own genuine concern for her well-being. "Just Braxton Hicks contractions," she assured me, though her expression remained pained. "The stress isn't helping. This isn't how I imagined bringing a child into the world, surrounded by FBI agents, hiding from their father." Despite everything that had transpired between us, I felt a surge of empathy for her situation. She had been manipulated just as I had, albeit in different ways, and now found herself 7 months pregnant and entangled in a dangerous federal investigation. "Whatever happens with David," I said quietly, "your child deserves protection and stability." She nodded gratefully, tears welling in her eyes. "That's why I came forward when I realized what he might be planning. I couldn't let my baby's father be responsible for harming innocent people." Our moment of unexpected connection was interrupted by Agent Morris receiving an urgent call. His expression darkened as he listened. "Understood. Maintain a perimeter and await specialized equipment." He ended the call and addressed the room. "The bomb squad's preliminary assessment confirms our concern. The container in the foundation appears to contain some kind of device with electronic components. They can't determine explosive capacity without more invasive techniques, which could potentially trigger the device. So we have an unidentified device, possibly explosive, embedded in the foundation of a major healthcare facility, set to activate in approximately 18 hours, Rodriguez summarized grimly. And a fugitive architect with unknown accomplices who may have access to additional dangerous materials. The rain had intensified outside, lightning occasionally illuminating the conference room in stark flashes. The weather forecaster on a muted television in the corner was gesturing at a significant storm system moving through the region, potentially complicating evacuation and containment efforts at the medical center. "There's something else to consider," I said, the pieces coming together in my mind. David's text said, "The foundation holds the truth, but not in the way you think." What if the device isn't primarily destructive but informational? A time-release mechanism for evidence rather than explosives? "Meaning what, exactly?" Mitchell asked. David gathered extensive documentation on everyone involved in the corruption network. What if he created some kind of dead man's switch? A system that would automatically release all his evidence if he couldn't prevent it? Morris considered this theory. It would align with his apparent desire to expose the truth, regardless of his personal fate. But it doesn't explain why he'd embed it physically in the foundation rather than use a secure digital platform. Because he didn't trust digital security, I explained, recalling conversations from early in our marriage. David always believed that truly sensitive information should have physical protection, not just encryption. He was almost paranoid about hacking and digital surveillance. This insight prompted a new direction for the investigation. If the device was indeed an information release mechanism, rather than primarily destructive, the approach to containment and neutralization would differ significantly. As technicians analyzed the text message for possible location data and agents, coordinated the dual operations at the medical center in our house, I found myself in the eye of a storm that had been brewing for years without my knowledge. The deception that had begun with a simple affair had expanded to encompass fraud, corruption, blackmail, and now potential public endangerment. Mrs. Blackwell, Agent Rodriguez approached with a satellite phone. "There's a call for you. It's being routed through multiple proxies, but we believe it's David." The room fell silent as I accepted the phone, Rodriguez activating recording equipment and indicating I should keep him talking as long as possible to facilitate tracing. "David," I answered, my voice calm despite the circumstances. "Catherine." His voice sounded distant, tired. "I see you've figured out most of it." "Not all of it," I replied carefully. "Why don't you help me understand the rest?" A bitter laugh came through the line. "Always the thorough attorney, even now. I imagine you're surrounded by federal agents tracing this call. You knew that when you called, which means you want to be found, or at least heard." There was a long pause before he responded. "The container in the foundation? It's not what they think. It won't harm anyone physically." "Then what will it do, David?" "Release the complete truth. Not just about me or James Grayson or the contractors who cut corners and bribed inspectors. The whole system, Catherine, reaching all the way to the governor's office. Names, dates, amounts, recordings, everything I've documented over 4 years." "Why not just release it now?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Why the countdown?" Another pause. "Because I needed time to get to safety, and because some truths need a dramatic entrance. At precisely 10 a.m. tomorrow, every major news outlet, law enforcement agency, and regulatory body will simultaneously receive the complete documentation. The Medical Center Foundation is just one backup delivery method: insurance against digital interception." "And what do you hope to accomplish with this revelation?" I pressed, aware of agents frantically working to trace the call. "Justice," he said simply. "Not the narrow kind focused on me as a convenient scapegoat, but true accountability for everyone involved. From the lowest inspector who took bribes to ignore code violations to the highest officials who orchestrated the entire system. Including yourself," I noted. "I've never denied my guilt, Catherine, but I refuse to be the only one who pays for a corrupt system I merely joined rather than created." As he spoke, an agent signaled they were narrowing down his location, somewhere in the northern part of the state. "What about Amanda?" I asked, trying to keep him talking. "And your child? Where do they fit in this crusade for justice?" His voice softened slightly. "I've provided for them. The documentation I sent her includes access to funds I've secured offshore, money that can't be traced or seized. It's more than enough to support them comfortably." "And Jessica? And your son Tyler? Were they just collateral damage in your grand schemes as well?" Mentioning his previous family clearly struck a nerve. "I've made arrangements for them too. Part of tomorrow's release includes trust documentation for Tyler's education and future. It's not enough to make up for my absence, but it's something." Behind me, an agent held up a note. "Location narrowed to 50-mile radius north of Lake Superior." Continuing to triangulate. "David," I said carefully, "whatever you've set in motion, is there any way to stop it?" To prevent potential chaos when all this information is released at once? He laughed again, the sound hollow and tired. That's the point, Catherine. The chaos. The sudden, unavoidable reckoning. No gradual damage control, no spin, no scapegoating. Just the complete, unfiltered truth all at once. The call was our best chance to locate him before whatever he had planned reached its culmination. I needed to keep him engaged. And what happens to you after tomorrow? I asked. When will your grand revelation be complete? His answer sent a chill through me. That chapter hasn't been written yet. But don't worry about me. By this time tomorrow, my personal fate will be the least interesting part of this story. The ominous implication hung in the air as agents signaled they were closing in on his location. Whether David planned to flee internationally, surrender, or something more drastic remained unclear. But the countdown to his orchestrated revelation was ticking inexorably forward, and with it, the potential collapse of a corruption network that reached far beyond what any of us had initially imagined. 5 years later, the cafe overlooking the harbor was quiet for a Tuesday afternoon. I sipped my latte, watching sailboats drift across the water while waiting for my appointment. The coastal town I now called home was worlds away from the life I'd left behind when David's orchestrated revelation had shattered our city's power, structure. Catherine? A familiar voice drew my attention. Amanda stood before me, looking remarkably different from the pregnant woman who had appeared on my doorstep 5 years ago. Her daughter, a dark-haired 4-year-old with David's eyes, clung shyly to her hand. "Thank you for meeting me," Amanda said as they settled into the chairs across from me. "Of course." I smiled at the little girl. "Hello, Emma." She ducked behind her mother's arm, peeking out cautiously. "She knows who you are," Amanda explained softly. "As much as a child her age can understand, anyway." We sat in comfortable silence. For a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. "Have you heard anything?" Amanda finally asked. I shook my head. No. After his evidence release caused the indictment of 37 officials, including the governor, David disappeared completely. The last confirmed sighting was crossing into Canada 5 years ago. The day David's dead man switch had activated remained etched in my memory. Exactly as he'd promised, at 10 a.m., every news outlet and law enforcement agency had simultaneously received comprehensive evidence of corruption reaching to the highest levels of state government. The scandal had dominated headlines for months. Sometimes, "I think he's watching," Amanda said, glancing toward the harbor. "Making sure Emma is okay from a distance." Perhaps he was. The man who had meticulously documented years of corruption while maintaining a double life was certainly capable of disappearing when motivated. "The trust fund he established has been managed perfectly," Amanda continued. "Emma will never want for anything." I nodded, remembering how David's financial provisions had extended to Jessica and Tyler as well, a belated attempt at responsibility for the families he had abandoned. "And you?" Amanda asked. "Your new practice is doing well?" "Very well," I confirmed. It turns out there's significant demand for attorneys specializing in whistleblower protection and corporate fraud cases. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. How David's deception had ultimately led me to my most fulfilling professional work. As we prepared to part ways, Amanda hesitated. "Do you ever regret it? Investigating him, setting everything in motion?" I considered the question carefully. No. The truth was always going to surface eventually. Better a controlled explosion than a lifetime of deception. Emma emerged from behind her mother, studying me with curious eyes that reminded me painfully of the man we had both loved and lost in different ways. "Goodbye, Catherine," Amanda said, gathering her daughter. "Until next year." I watched them walk away along the harbor path, 2 lives forever altered by a single fateful Sunday when a pregnant woman had shown up at my door with the words, "Surprise, honey." The truth had indeed been revealed, but in ways none of us could have possibly imagined. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, These are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.